Hello everyone, you're listening to The Right Side of Gaming. Today we're talking about how to build a Rakdos or Black-Red deck in Magic Legends. As always, we have the standard disclaimer for this series. It's aimed more at newer players who probably don't have a particularly diverse card pool, who don't really know what they want to build yet, and are just kind of focusing on the spells they've got and don't necessarily have all the gear that they want to build around just yet. More experienced players, you probably have the rarer cards, the mythic cards. You probably are taking into account your gear and artifacts, things like that. We might touch on them a little bit, but the focus in this series is more on the common and uncommon cards. To start with, if there's one thing that black and red both do well in Magic Legends, it's just damage. Just your damage spells. They both have a lot of great spells that just deal damage. Red has some that's all they do. There's no special effect to them, it's just you deal damage. Black has some really good ones, especially ones that deal damage over time. But you can totally put those together and take advantage of Black's critical effects, which are basically you'll deal more damage if they're low on health. Butcher will deal 100% more damage to foes with 50% or less health. And Abyssal Flame will deal 50% more damage to foes with 50% or less health. Very straightforward. Just throw in a bunch of stuff that deals a lot of damage and have at it. If you're looking for something a little bit more complex, though, we do have some options. Our red spells crit whenever the target is affected by a damage over time effect. So Slack Strike will deal double damage if the target is affected by a damage over time effect, or dot. And Magma Burst will also deal double damage if the target is affected by a dot. Black has cards like Doomsday Wraith, and Fest, and Leech Outbreak that will deal damage over time. Red has Juvenile Kavu, Pyroclasm, and Molten Shell. When you get into some rarer options, you can add in Parasitic Infection, Creeping Plague, and Werewolf Shaman, although that one's a little bit harder to pull off. And I might focus more on Parasitic Infection and Creeping Plague in that instance. But you have a lot of options for dealing damage over time to trigger effects like Magma Burst and Slag Strike, and you can still slip in Butcher and Abyssal Flame just to deal the extra damage. In fact, you could probably do that with all of these. If you want to go another way with it, they both have a lot of cards that will create hazards. And we've also seen regional effects where hazards deal more damage, and players have tried to take advantage of that by creating decks that have more hazards in them. I don't know if they're going to keep it that way, or if they're going to nerf it so that only enemy hazards deal more damage under those. Really interesting to see how that plays out. Black has Desecrate, Shadow Barrage, Abyssal Flame, Darksworn Cleric, and Wailing Souls that will all create hazards, whereas red will let you use Goblin Firebomber and Lava Vortex to do the same. And then again, they have rare options in Corpse Fiend, Werewolf Shaman, Elemental Shatter, and Bathe in Dragonfire, which is just a fun one to use just based on the name and the flavor alone. But these will all create hazards that are areas on the field where when enemies are in them or walk through them, they will be subject to some type of effect. Usually it's something like damage, but sometimes you'll get damage over time, or some type of control effect like a snare. But it's a great way to sort of litter the field with your own effects. And some people sort of like that more control, or not quite summon, but creating effects on the field type of play. And then you get to run around and try to get enemies to follow you into them. Now, if you want to, black is great at sacrifice effects, and at some point you'll probably get gear or artifacts that trigger off of sacrifice effects, and you have a little bit of that in red too that you can play off of. But that's another build route you can go. You can use cards like Desecrate, Rotting Fentusker, Voracious Thrall, Abyssal Fiend, and Fuming Onslaught to sacrifice your own creatures. And when you do, you'll usually get some type of effect. Desecrate is going to deal additional damage. Rotting Fentusker is going to get a buff whenever a creature you control dies. Voracious Thrall is going to pull creatures to itself, and then I think you can sacrifice it for another effect. Abyssal Fiend is going to get a buff based on whatever you sacrifice. Fuming Onslaught is just going to have all your creatures move faster and attack faster while it's in effect, and then the creatures get sacrificed. So if you have a bunch of weaker creatures that were going to die anyway, well, have at it. And you can also use Annihilation to just sacrifice everything you have. And depending on how you build, maybe you want a bunch of big creatures to sacrifice for effects, or maybe you want to sacrifice a bunch of small creatures and see how many things you can, trigger or get triggered. I know something like Open Graves every time a creature you control dies. Well, this would potentially make a lot of little tokens. There's different ways you can play it, and this is basically just a sacrifice everything you've got and deal a bunch of damage. Finally, black and red both have ways to do just absolute hordes of creatures. Black has zombies, red has goblins. There's not a whole lot of interaction between the two of them, but if you decide you want to go one of those ways and just supplement it with maybe damage spells from both colors, or maybe the color, like let's say you go black zombies, throw in some red spells for damage, or maybe you want to do goblins and throw in some black spells for damage or control or something like that. You can absolutely do that. And I think we have gone over some ways to build zombies or goblins. It's pretty straightforward. You'll just have a lot of cards that say zombies or goblins on them. I do want to point out that Goblin Warchief is one of those that works well in either route, be it zombies or goblins, because it's going to buff your other creatures. If you go zombies, you're probably going to be making a lot of zombies, and they're all going to get a bonus to their attack when Goblin Warchief is out. Conversely, if you go goblins, all your goblins are going to get a bonus while Goblin Warchief is out. They're going to get that same +1 bonus to their power, but they're also going to get greater swiftness and move faster. But it's one of those where either way you go, you've got something that's going to be able to buff up your absolute horde of creatures. That's all I had for today. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you'd like to leave a like, comment, subscribe, that'd be great. If not, that's okay too. I understand. Either way, I hope you have an awesome day, and I will catch you next time.